أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another session of Islamic Parenting 101 webinar. Inshallah. Now we're into our 5th week, inshallah. And before I start off, we'll just go through some basic ground rules as always, inshallah. If you are joining via the GoToMeeting app, then please make sure when you do join the webinar, you ensure that your mic is on mute so it prevents from disturbing the session. If you are tuning in via Facebook Live or Instagram, then inshallah, you'll be able to, if you do make any comments or put any questions, I won't be able to attend to those questions during the session, but I can inshallah strive to reply to them after the session. If you wish to be able to ask a question within the session and get the answer, then you need to go via the GoToMeeting app, which you can access via the link, which is bit.ly/Islamic Parenting 101. Inshallah, that's where you'll be able to also, any screen sharing will take place via the app, inshallah. So with that basic start, inshallah, we'll begin. Today's topic that we're looking to discuss is regarding homeschooling during the pandemic. And before we kind of open up, inshallah, maybe a lot of the parents will have a different understanding of what we might be discussing today, inshallah. But I want to hear from parents, how have you found the homeschooling challenge, especially for those who don't already homeschool? So obviously we're talking about the parents who are already homeschooling, those who have been, the children have been going to either mainstream school or private schools, and now they are actually at home. How have you been finding the homeschooling, inshallah? So I would like to hear from you. Please do feel free to unmute yourself and you can comment, or you can just put a comment in the chat, inshallah. So Sister Yusuf has said she's finding it difficult to motivate a child to start their homework and keep them focused. So I'm sure that's a lot of things, well, that's one common thing a lot of parents can relate to, and they will find probably similar. Juby, I agree, especially when you are working from home. Yeah, that's another important challenge that parents are facing, which is that whenever they're homeschooling their children, they're also most likely working from home. And so that's also a struggle. Anyone else? Okay, alhamdulillah, and some parents have written up a holiday routine. Any other thing that you found regarding the homeschooling during this lockdown period? Okay. Yep, so difficult to motivate kids. So this seems to be quite a lot of the common things, that keeping the children focused, keeping them motivated to be able to continue working during this time, and also the challenge where parents face of working from home as well as trying to do the homeschooling. There's a couple other comments and we'll move on. My challenges with my 6-year-old when the father isn't around. So sometimes that can also be a difficulty, the child being at home all day and one of the parents may be out working and not able to come in. Yeah, other ones are practical ones. Like when the sister mentions that it's about sharing the computer. When you may only have one computer at home, you may have several children, and so it becomes difficult, or you're even having to use a computer and it's having a big impact. So generally, it's juggling everything. It's a very difficult task to juggle and to be able to basically manage everything. And motivation is obviously a key part of it. So, inshallah, let me just quickly share the screen, and then we'll start with. So, the homeschooling during the pandemic, and what is really, really important to kind of understand first is I want to kind of go into actually the schooling system we have here in the UK. And I think before we can go into homeschooling, it's important to understand what is the system that we have here in the UK and what are the kind of pros and the cons of it before we kind of move forward. Those, right. So one thing that we should know that in the UK, and the UK is very much one of the very, very few countries that actually start the formal process of education, formal education from the age of 4. Um, and a lot of the other countries, they do later on in their ages. And if we look into the historical background regarding why the current education system we do have is set up the way it is, it was actually initially introduced back in 1870, and the main purpose was to get women basically into work. And so the system has been created and has continued to be adapted and fine-tuned more for the purpose of work and economy than the benefit, than the education benefit of the child. And that's an important thing that we have to remember. That and you see the way especially the governments of recent time have focused on education and saying, hang on a minute, children aren't really UK children aren't achieving as high as other children. We need to start them earlier. They need to know this earlier. The phonics needs to be earlier, and many of these points have been pushed out. But really, the question is that correct? Is our system correct? And a lot of the motivations of the current education system is all around economy and boosting the economy. And especially you're talking about post-war, the need for women to now work. Now, the way you look at it from a government perspective is, if you've got an economy, it needs to create money, it needs to make money. That means you need more people in work. Now, usually if men were the only workers and women weren't, there's a massive latent manpower that you have there that you can now tap into and get them to be also working. And so you then see step by step new kind of initiatives and incentives given to parents to allow them to come into work. So what you then find, and recently we've seen, is you get the free kind of 15 hours of kind of child's care for preschool children. And so that preschool child now is able to get 15 hours for free to entice a parent, or they can start working maybe part-time, or maybe even cover some of the cost of their childcare. And all of those things is done in the way to push more people into work, to boost the economy, and not necessarily looking from the benefit of the child. And this is something, if you want to understand a bit more, you can look into, there's a book that I always recommend to a lot of parents to read first. It's not a parenting book per se, but it unravels a lot of the problems around parenting and children. It's called Toxic Childhood by Sue Palmer. I think I might have talked about this or mentioned this book before. But in there, she really does explain regarding the economy and the boost of women into work, that a lot of the education system that we do have has been set up in that way. And what we see is a big drive to get even preschool. So children, the moment after a child is born, to get them almost into preschool, into daycare, into childcare, and so the mother can get back into work and start earning again. And the economy is being created in such a way now that in order for a person to live, they need two incomes. The mother and the father needs to work, because they don't have to pay, and they've created the system where you have to pay the mortgage and you have all of these bills and all of those things that now no longer can a household be maintained by a single income, i.e. the father. Now it requires both. And so it becomes handicapped, and some parents are actually forced into a situation where they have no choice but both parents to work. And at the same time, they'd follow all the incentives to encourage them into work. But one thing is really important, and I know a lot of questions have come actually within the WhatsApp groups as well in regards to this, which is that parents have questions regarding preschool, about young children, and I've mentioned it quite a few times, that the first 3 years of the child are very, very important, are most paramount, and it has the biggest impact in later on in life, in what happens in the first 3 years of life. The first 3 years of life, this is when the child is developing his attachment, and he becomes confident, and he grows. And in this period, if there is a detachment from their parents, then it has a massive impact. So we'll start with the talking about preschool, and then we will talk a bit more about the later stages. Now, if those who may be familiar with John Bowlby and his theory of the attachment theory. So this is going back into the 1950s. And he described regarding children in the first 3 years, if they are put into childcare or into a preschool, that they go through a certain process which becomes very much harmful in the long run. And we see a lot of parents complain about the problems they have with the child in the teenage years. And most of the time, the source of that, if you go back, is actually regarding what happened in the early years in the attachment being built with the child. And that's now basically bearing fruit in these teenage years. And he talked about a concept of what you call PDD, yeah, which was, it's called protest, despair, and detachment. So when a child is, for example, now taken away from the primary caregiver, which is usually the mother, and put into, say, a preschool at the age of 2, or maybe, even at 1, 2, 2.5. When the child is then put in there, then what happens is you see with all children is they go through a process of protesting. So the moment they're separated out straight away from their mother, the primary caregiver, they'll protest, they'll cry, they'll do many things to basically basically show their protest. And you see that the child is always crying, a teacher might have to hold them back. But after a period of time, maybe about a week or so, then what happens, the child enters into a new phase, which is called despair. Now what you see is the child has basically, they're still missing the primary caregiver, the mother, the parent, but now they've gone to a stage of hopelessness. And so that hopelessness is characterized by basically no activity. Yeah, so they just sit there, they've resigned themselves, they don't cry anymore, but they're not engaging, they're not playing, they're not having fun because they're missing their mother. And then again, after a period of time passes, they go into the last stage, which is now detachment. Now what happens is the child is now get up, is interested by its surroundings, it's going to play, it's going to accept everything, the food around them, the play and the toys and the other children. And now if the primary caregiver comes back, i.e. the mother comes back, the child will have no interest in the mother because it's now enjoying themselves. Now, a lot of the times we've been programmed to think, oh, this is good. He's now adjusted. Now my child is playing and is having fun. But actually, they've now become, these are the seeds that have been sown of basically being detached from a young age. And these have a long-term impact on the child. And it can similarly happen to, for example, children who have, for example, nannies and others, where parents do go to work, the same kind of similar concept. And so it's really important that we actually relook at the early years as well. And the first 3 years become such an important part. And the push them into school, into formal education and into preschool, this isn't really helpful at all to the child. Now, if we move on to a bit of the older years, there is you see that in Finland and in Sweden, a good example, because with Europe, that they start their formal education of the children at the age of 7. And what is very connection is that children at the age of 7, so just turn the mic off whoever joins, inshallah, that they start the formal education of the children at the age of 7, and they've seen that the result is that they have better academic achievement and better child well-being than we have here in the UK. And they start at the age of 7. But yet here we're being pushed to say, oh, hang on a minute, we need to start earlier because the kids are doing well enough and keeping up with the rest of Europe and the rest of the world in their achievements. And so there's a massive push, and there is a call from a lot of academics, a lot of researchers. You're talking about there's overwhelming evidence from anthropological, psychological, neuroscientific, and educational studies, which shows that children starting formal education at later years is better. So what that means is it's better to extend the informal play-based kind of preschool activities that you see now with preschoolers up until the age of 7. So the children learn through play, and through that process is when they learn, and to delay up until age 7. And here in a 2009 book, The Playful Brain, Venturing to the Limits of Neuroscience, this one, it reviewed many studies showing that playful activity leads to the growth of more connections between the neurons, particularly in the frontal lobe. And that part of the brain is responsible for uniquely human higher mental functions. So to really develop your child, a lot of the times you see that it's actually through play your child learns. And that's why you see in the infant years and in the toddler years that a child is crawling, is exploring, it's learning, it's tasting, it's touching. And all of these things are part of its development. And the more you play, the more a child can learn. I've always said that, we know that, for example, Lego is a fantastic toy that you can make use of, and you have a lot of learning. A lot of it learns about fine motor skills, ability to hold, ability to place objects, fitting within the same sizes, and also about maths, even counting, even with colors and recognizing differences between shapes and sizes. There's a lot of benefit you can get that the child is actually learning, but through that method of play. And so it becomes, there's a big call for this, and it's something I do advocate as much as possible, that really, the education system needs to be reformed in order to get the best out of our children and from a young age. So taking all of that into consideration, thinking that, okay, really, do we have the best system here in the UK? I don't think so. And a lot of others who are experts in this field also agree that this isn't. And in fact, pushing a child for formal education, I mean, sitting behind a table and desk, learning numbers from reception, you're talking about age of 4, is actually a long-term harm on the child. And so we now kind of move on to, okay, what is it that we do now in terms of homeschooling for ourselves? What's the kind of guide? How can we approach homeschooling? Now, this applies both to those who actually full-time homeschool and in our current situation in this pandemic. And the first thing that we should remember is, as parents, we shouldn't be afraid and we shouldn't get too worked up with the schooling. I know a lot of parents have been mentioned, I can't get my child to concentrate, to focus, for them to complete their homework. And sometimes the parents can start getting worried. First thing is, don't panic, relax. That's always the first thing. It's similar that we mentioned last week, just to calm down, to relax and not to worry regarding the situation you're in. If you do have, for example, under 7-year-olds at home, then again, similarly, don't worry so much. Try, and if you want them to encourage to learn and to develop, try and do it for play and kind of over informal learning, not the formal kind of learning. Because trust me, your child isn't really losing out. And I've spoken to even with my own children in their school, their head teacher, and many other teachers. They've kind of made it clear that really the schoolwork that's being given by the school, there isn't much of an expectation that children will actually complete it, nor are a lot of schools giving a lot of work. Rather, the process of them giving work is for them to keep kind of daily touch with their children that they look after in the school, to make sure that they're okay. And a lot of it is actually more around safeguarding and child protection. We've seen actually now the schools, if you look at it, other than key workers, the children that are going in, those who are vulnerable children. So really that shows that from the academic perspective, the concern of schools is a lot more around the safeguarding and the protection of children. And so don't get too worried about the work that they're doing. And one of the key things, teachers have said it so many times, and we've heard it many times, is even if your child did zero work, and I'm not necessarily advocating that, imagine they did zero work, is when they go back to school, the teachers they already know they're going to have plans in place to work extremely hard, double hard, in order to bring every child back up to the level expected at that stage. And so the schools are actually going to basically bring your child back up. And it's important to remember that really what you're doing at home this isn't homeschooling. This isn't a summer school. Rather, what it is effectively a parenting pandemic. And what is the most important thing to do is to remember, you are not a maths teacher. You may be, but generally speaking, you're not a maths teacher. You're not an English teacher. You're not a science teacher. So, don't get so threatened and worked up about that. Rather, do what you do best, which is look after your children's basic needs, their food, their clothing, their shelter, and give them that emotional support that they require at this moment in time, and not get so worked up and so focused on the learning aspect of it. We have to remember, home isn't school. Home isn't school. For those, as I said, children don't normally get homeschooled. And so, the recommendation I've always said and given is try and avoid try recreating a school day at 9 a.m. to 3:30 and having all of these lessons one by one in there. Try and avoid and stop trying to recreate those kind of school days. So because home isn't school, and your child isn't going to be focused as much as they would normally be at school. And so that comes to, okay, so what should be our key role as parents here during this homeschooling period? What is our key role? Our key role should be that we're looking after our children's mental health and well-being. It's a very important thing that more and more we're understanding more about the impacts of mental health and the impacts on our children. And it's important that in this current climate, and we're going to discuss this in a bit more detail a bit later on, inshallah, is how can we actually look after their health and well-being. And normally, we look at it in a positive way that previously we may not have had enough time with our children. Parents may have been working, both parents might be working, or maybe the father's only been working. And because of that, we've not been able to spend quality time with our children. And so this is a fantastic time now. Work on that. really work on building the strong connections with your child in this period of time, and take that, because that will have the best, longest lasting impact on your child. And another key thing, though, is very clear, is while parents are, a lot of them are focusing on their academic achievement, we might even be neglecting their own Islamic and spiritual development. So rather, I would say that it's more important and more incumbent that we actually focus on the Dini development of our children, and again, in that development, to make it fun and enjoyable, and basically to help develop them, inshallah. And so now I'll go through those 2 points, looking at their spiritual development and then looking at the mental health and their well-being, inshallah. I know there are some questions coming in, inshallah. We'll try and address them at the end of the session. But please do feel free to ask the questions now, and we'll address at the end. So if we look at the Islamic development, what we have to understand is we are in a period of time where we're under prolonged engagement with our children. Where normally, like I said, your child will go to school, they'll come back, there's time when they're away from you. Now they're with you 24/7. And so we need to look this in the positive way. That we've discussed this several times before, the concept of modeling, that a child imitates the actions of the adults, of the parent. And so they actually listen to what you do and not what you say. And so it's an important thing to remember that we should use this time to ensure that our character, our actions, all of those things are reflective or are actions that we want our children to do. So focus on that. Look at yourself, and whatever you're doing, know your child will start imitating. So inshallah, if you are now engaging in a lot of good speech, good actions, then over a prolonged time your child is seeing it, they will naturally pick this up, and they will naturally pick it, and they will imitate that. So there's a good benefit there. So that alone, yourself and your Islamic development will have a rub-on effect on your child being in this period of time. Another thing that's very important is we have to look at that our role as parents is to nurture the iman of our children. That our child is to develop it and allow it to grow. And you have to look at it is almost like a agricultural kind of process, where you plant the seeds and then you give all of it the sunlight and the water and allow it to basically grow. And that is iman. Iman will grow in your child. And so to really work on that and really understand that. So having conversations, having reminders, and speaking a lot more about Allah and that development, inshallah, will allow that nurturing to grow. And then our actions is actually what brings that to life as well. So really focus on that, on yourself, on nurturing of the iman, and then naturally is to develop the Islamic knowledge. Now, a lot of the times, maybe our children, they might go to madrasa after school, evening madrasas, or the weekends, maktabs, and that's where they would go and they would learn some of the knowledge. And sometimes we almost outsource our responsibility of fulfilling this to someone else. But really, the key role of this responsibility lies on the parents. And I know a lot of madrasas and maktabs are closed. Some might be doing it online. But nevertheless, this is the opportunity that the parents should be giving you. We should be continually discussing and learning through that. It doesn't necessarily mean always sitting down formally and having a thing, but in those times when we're talking, conversing, in downtime, there's a lot that can be learned, a lot of development that can take place. So this is where teaching the children the fara'id of our deen, teaching them about fiqh and other things that they need to learn and develop. And there's fun ways of doing it. Sometimes you could have it where you might give a short presentation on something. Thereafter, then later on do a quiz. I know one of my children, they really do like the quizzes that we have at home. We do the quizzes, and there's incentives. Those who come first in the quiz, they get a certain prize. Second, third, everybody gets something, but lower in degree. And that really pushes them to try and learn and to remember. And using that mechanism in order to really develop their knowledge and their growth. Another also important thing, fantastic thing is the Quran. Yeah, the Quran is filled with stories and anecdotes. And there's a reason why it's filled with stories, and it's through those stories that we can learn and take lessons from. And a lot of times you see that, what do you have with children? Children, you have lots of storybooks. Children encourage, or when they go to bed, they read, you read a storybook. Children love stories. So make use of that and develop that. Whether you're young or old, everybody loves a good story. Storytelling is the best thing. If you look at news and media out there, what do? They storytell. That's how they change people's opinions and understandings. And so stories are there. In the Quran, some amazing and beautiful stories. Go through those stories with your children. You know, relate to them. Sometimes they might have some things in their life that they're finding difficult. Talk to them. Maybe, we can relate to some of the difficulties of other prophets have had. So you're talking about something around the issue around health right now. Then what you can do is look at, okay, if this is the issue around health at the moment, maybe relate to some of the prophets. Like Prophet Ayub alayhi salam, when he went through his difficulty of health and other things. So try and relate and have that connected, do those stories. Obviously linked to that are separately stories of the prophets. Ibn Kathir's got his the stories of the prophets. Again, you can go through that, learning. There's so much wisdom and so much learning we can take from them. And similarly, also learning from the stories of the companions. There's many, many books now out there of stories of the companions. Some of them might be too high of a level, if your children are lower, and some of them might be okay. So find means and ways of going through these stories, getting your children to read them themselves, you reading them to them, having it together in a fun way. And this becomes such an important thing, and we need to take the most out of it, because our children maybe every day are going out to school, they may be using screens and watching on YouTube and other things, and in their lives they're building different role models in their lives that they aspire to be like. They think, yeah, this guy's amazing. We talked about it last week that people now, children now aspire to become a YouTuber. The aspirations are so low because they see that's what it is, that this is fame and this is money and all those things. And so it becomes very important that we do try and develop and create, the real heroes that they should be aspiring to, the real role models. And this is the time we can have that, because now they're with us. This is the time where we can really help and drive and nurture all of these nurture their iman and bring in the love for the companions, for the Prophet, for the Quran, for all of these things. And so this becomes an important time where we can do that and really get them to get aspiring role models. Throughout our history, we see Islamic history, we see many, many amazing young companions, tabi'is, tabi'is, salaf. You go back, prophets, how they've done many amazing things. And so we can really take heed and lessons from them, inshallah. So it's really important that we develop the aspirations of our children through some of this storytelling that we can do. Also, in terms of the important part, obviously now it's Ramadan, so it is a very fantastic time, irrespective, is connect with the Quran. Nothing is better than the speech of Allah. So connect with the Quran. And using the Quran, there are many dua that can be learned in the Quran, and also there's many other dua outside of the Quran. But nurture that, because the more and more your child remembers Allah, then they becomes a complete part of them. Teach them when they eat the dua before eating, after finishing eating, going to bed, when they wake up, entering the toilet, when they leave the toilet. With everything, we develop the dua. They know that every part of their life, Allah is encompassing, and Islam is covered everything. And so this is an important thing. Yeah, that's part of it. So have that, build that, the teaching of the dua for them, and also the love of the Quran. And for them to read the Quran, to understand the Quran, and what we should do, that we should sit and we should try and get them to help them to understand the Quran. Again, similar back before, we talked about the stories from the Quran. I know a lot of us may be at home doing Taraweeh with our families, together in Jama'ah. Use that as a time. Maybe whatever verses are going to be recited, read the translation before and discuss that with your family with the Salah. Make it come alive, make it interactive. And then you see the real benefit of it. And I know we've tried to do it at home when we've had Taraweeh, and my son's been leading, and then some of the ayat after we'll stop, and then we'll say, okay, do you know what was recited here? And then try and bring that alive and say, this is what Allah's talking about. There's lessons to be learned. So using opportunities that arise to discuss and to learn as well. And an important thing that we should really utilize is praying in Jama'ah. If you're at home now, pray all your Salah in Jama'ah. Get your children behind you. Get them to pray. Get your wife, everybody together and pray. Use every opportunity, create the timetable, create the set times that you do have in your day that, okay, this is the salah time for dhuhr, this is for asr, this is for maghrib and isha, and have those set times ready, and have your child and your children praying together. I've said this before, a family who prays together, stays together, and you create those memories. So the work you can do now will create a long-term memory and the building of the iman for your children. And so we need to really tend to the Islamic development. If anything, I would say, don't worry at all about the academic development. Look at the Islamic development of your child. This is the most important time that we can get through through this pandemic, inshallah. We'll move on to the next part, which is looking at the mental health and the well-being of our child. Now, with the mental health, it's important. There's a lot of things that we need to really actually think and understand. And it's having a massive impact on our children. That this whole current climate is having a massive, massive negative impact on our child, whether they say it verbally or whether they don't. From the smallest things of, I can't go outside. So they can't go outside, they can't play, they can't get maybe exercise, and they can't do all of those things. This is the first and foremost kind of impacts having on your children. But also some of them, especially those who, as they get older and older, is some of them not being able to see their friends. And that has a massive impact, not to be able to socialize, not to be able to see family, extended family. And some of these can have a massive impact as well on, obviously, these children who've got special educational needs. And that becomes also another stumbling and difficult challenge for those children. And some parents have mentioned here that with teenagers, those who are meant to be setting GCSEs or exams, and suddenly there's children who may have worked really, there are children who work really hard for the exams. And in fact, they were looking forward to it as a means of showing off their ability that I've worked hard and they wanted to get something. And so how can, and that can be a massive mental challenge for them, that they feel like, oh, I've not had the chance to be able to show and to prove myself. And that has a knock-on effect. And there's ways that we have to look about and think about how can we challenge this, how can we help them, how can we support them. And with things like the things that are out of our control, one of the important things that we should try and do is reflect back on explaining the concept of qadr and predestiny to our children, and talking about the separation between action and outcome. And really, in life, we've always felt that if you do something, it will always have a certain outcome. But that's not life. Sometimes you can do something, but it never achieves the outcome at the end. And this is something we need to really build into our children and make them understand that actions and outcomes are actually separate. They're not necessarily connected. Usually, yes, the rule of thumb is that if you put in good effort, good thing, then you'll have an outcome. But sometimes it's not always correct. And what Allah wants from us is actually to put the effort in, and then He'll give the outcome, irrespective of that. And if we put our effort in, alhamdulillah, that's what should be our main focus. And we look at the example, what happened with Maryam alayhi salam. After she'd given birth to Isa ibn Maryam, she's lying underneath a date palm tree. Now, if we talked about actions equal outcome all the time, then there's no way possible that she could shake a date palm tree. We can't shake it. But a woman just after giving birth to shake it, impossible. And for anything to fall. So really, your action doesn't do that. But Allah asked her just to do something, put the effort in. So she put the effort in, and Allah made the date strong. And that's what we're trying to get to our children, that Allah wants us to put the effort in. Don't worry about the outcome. Allah only cares about the effort. And that should also be academically our motto. And I've tried to always drill it to my children. I really don't care about their results they get in their exams, because I don't believe in exams anyway, because it's not really a true reflection of your child's ability. Because there are many variables that impact on your child's achievement. It could be that day they felt ill, they had a headache, family bereavement, they didn't sleep well. There's so many factors that impact on an exam that doesn't actually show a good, true and fair reflection of your child's achievement. But rather, it's the effort that I'm more interested in. So if a child then comes and the results aren't good, you ask him, did you put the effort in? Yes, I put the effort in. Alhamdulillah, no problem. If the result isn't so good, did you put effort in? I didn't put effort in. Okay, now you know, inshallah, next time, try and put more effort in. Maybe you may be able to get a better outcome. But the main thing is the effort. And if we focus on the effort, that's what is the most benefit that we can give to our children. So really to discuss about that, understand that concept that outcomes and actions are actually separate. And really the outcome is from Allah. But all Allah wants us to do is do the action. We looked at Badr. Allah sent His companions and said, go to Badr, fight. And they went forth, 300 or so of them, against 1,000 of the Quraysh. Again, it defies logic. But yet, in the end, Allah enabled the Muslims to win. Again, because Allah just wanted you to take the stride forward and Allah will give you the rest. And so this is something we can really discuss with our child. And this is part of the mental health development, as well as actually the spiritual and the imani development as well. Also, there's other things that we do need to discuss and give support to our children, because some of them may be now fearing, okay, parents are maybe out of work. Some parents may have been on 0-hour contracts. Some parents might have now be not necessarily being furloughed. And there's so many issues around this. So a child might have fears about, okay, my dad, my mom losing the job, not money. Okay, Ramadan's here now, and children are thinking Eid's coming. Normally on Eid, maybe do a big celebration. You have family coming around, maybe presents and clothes and whatnot. They think, okay, we're not going to get all of those things. These are actually fears and concerns of your children that we really do need to address. And if we get too bogged down on, oh, do your homework, do these classes, we have to do all of those things, then we're actually really missing out on what's needed for our children, looking after them spiritually and mentally. Also, there's other fears that the children might have, which is in regards to every day we're hearing from the coronavirus all the news that's being spread regarding this number of deaths today, this number of deaths tomorrow. We've peaked, we've not, and all you're hearing is death, death, and gloom. You know, even for adults, it just makes it feel so doom and gloom, and it puts fear inside us. So what do you think it has on the impact of children? Naturally, they may have fears that, okay, people might die, my parents might die, I might die. And so we have to look at how is it that we're supporting our children through that process. And this becomes a real fear and a reality that we need to address, and we need to speak to them about. Additionally, linked to that is they may actually, in some families, we do know some children who have lost loved ones. Maybe grandparents have passed away. You know, maybe other relatives have passed away. So how are we actually supporting our children through this process of death? And it's an important point that we can remind. Again, the mental health and well-being is very much linked to our spiritual, and we can get support for our mental health and the well-being of our children through the spiritual development of our child. And how that, you know, question comes, okay, how do I address the issue of loss and the fear about death to our children? And one of the key things that we can always relate back to, and we should try and do the most, is relate back to our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and looking back at the Sunnah and looking at the Seerah, and we can really address it and say, look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that from birth he was born without a father, he was born an orphan, and that thereafter, when he lost his mother at the age of 6, and then he lost his grandfather at the age of 8, so at a very young age, for an 8-year-old, he's gone through loss on several occasions. You know, he went through that difficulty, but look at the man he became, look at what he did, and look at the status that he has. And we can really help our children to get to terms with the concept of death if we look at these examples. Also, even if you look at later on in life, that towards the older stages of life, even adults, we go through it. When we talk about the year of sorrow or grief, when the Prophet ﷺ lost his uncle Abu Talib, who protected him and gave him protection, and then the one who gave him strength, his wife, his companion Khadija radiallahu anha, who then passed away. And then you look at even more that when he went through these children that were being born, when you had, you know, his 3 sons that passed away. Qasim was the age of 3, passed away. Abdullah was born, and more or less after birth he passed away. Ibrahim, again, age of 2, losing children at such a young age, it has a massive impact. But we look at the example of the Prophet ﷺ. How is it that he was able to get through it? You know, these have massive impacts on them. And again, it's about the connection with Allah, and going through that and looking at these examples, they really do help. And a lot of things to also talk about in terms of death with children is in and around the story of Adam alayhi salam. And it's a very important story, the creation of man, the story of Adam alayhi salam, of being in Jannah and coming to this earth. Then it makes our children understand that actually this life is temporary for us, and that eternal home is Jannah, and this is somewhere we want to go and return back to. So it becomes important, and it gives a purpose of life. And so a lot of these discussions we should be having with our children to ensure that they're not afraid, that because sometimes a child won't speak about it, sometimes a child won't relate, but they are actually going through a difficult time. And so it's important that we do try our best to look after their mental health and well-being, inshallah. And so this is the main purpose that I wanted to cover regarding the homeschooling of the pandemic. that it's not necessarily about, okay, what are the actual things that you can do, what are the books you can use for homeschooling and for maths and English, but rather looking at overall that actually the current education system that we do have here today, it isn't really fit for purpose. So not to get so worried when you're coming at home that if your child hasn't been able to do certain things or is not doing it, rather provide the additional support that they need in the spiritual and the mental health development, inshallah. Now I'll quickly go through some of the questions that have come through, inshallah, and then please free to ask any other questions, inshallah, regarding this session. Okay, says here, my son was due to, yeah, so one of them said, my son is due to set the GCSEs, is saying, what's the point of kind of continuing with studies if he's not doing the exam, but he's doing Zoom lessons as normal? So a lot of these things can also be about, especially with older children and the teenagers, is about continuing their development. Because while GCSEs, they might not be sitting here, you know, they'll be going on maybe doing to do A levels, and it's important that whatever we do with ihsan, again, we talk about ihsan as a concept, and we can develop that. Again, everything's linked back to spiritual development as well. The Prophet said in the hadith that everything you should do with ihsan. So even if you are going to be slaughtering, sharpen the blade and you slaughter the animal. Do it with ihsan. Do it with the best. And so similarly, if we've done something, let's not leave it half finished. This was never something from the Prophet ﷺ. You finish it. You do it with ihsan and try and develop that. Again, a lot of them going back to these Islamic concepts and try to finishing that work. Another person said keeping children engaged and busy. Now that is a difficulty, and we've discussed it a few times before in regards to having to always, I think last week's session actually we talked about it, allowing children to be bored, allowing them to actually develop themselves, and not necessarily have to rely on you to always fill their time. And so, if you make reflection back to last week's session, maybe we'll have some benefit from there. Okay, sometimes as teenagers are choosing to do the subjects they like and avoiding the ones that they don't like. So same thing, it can be the case, but I don't think you need to get too worked up on that, inshallah. I do feel that, you know, the kids in our home, they do have sessions, they do learn, but their learning is probably about an hour of schoolwork and they're finished. You know, and I'm not too fussed because when they go to school, they will pick up. So not to lose so much hope regarding that, and because they will pick up, inshallah. So I've relaxed a bit as long as some work is done during the day. It's okay. It will make difficult for us. Yep, that's fine. Islamic. Okay, I say is it Islamic 7 years? When we talk about the first 7 years. Now we're actually talking about just generally, you know, the first 7 years of the child in terms of even up to the age of 7. Those tests and those studies have shown that up to the age of 7, in terms of kind of these calendar years, is what we're referring to. Okay, please recommend some good books on Quran, Prophets, Sahabas. There's a lot of resources out there. Inshallah, I can share those links. Maybe if you're in the WhatsApp groups, then I'll try and share some of the good resources that parents can make use of, inshallah, and also some of the Islamic quizzes and incentive systems, inshallah. But a lot of the times what we've done is, I know for Eid comes, on Eid day, normally we usually buy gifts for the children. So one of them have been that, okay, you can basically even for the quizzes, we can incentivize. You can put it as different things, but for my children, a bit older, so I said, okay, for every time you do a quiz, the first prize might be a £5 and £4, £3 goes down. You do a few quizzes and it equates up to a certain amount of money, and with that, they can buy something of that monetary value. So that's one of the incentives that we have used. Okay, so Shamim just shared something for some good picture books to use. Please, could you mention the main negative effects of early detachment that appear in the teenage years? Yeah, so when we discussed about the early years of attachment, and John Bowlby's basically attachment theory, we went over that it has a long-term effect in the teenage years. And what you didn't find is that sometimes the relationship and the trust has been broken. And that closeness isn't there any longer with the parents. When the parent then asks for something, the child rebels more than normal and more than what is expected. And it also has a negative impact on their social life as well. And the studies have shown that those early years that you spend with the child and those early years that you actually kind of have become detached from the child have a big impact on their social skills, and it can lead to stuff like social anxiety. It can lead to them finding it difficult to form and to hold relationships. And so sometimes people go into married life and marriages break down because of these reasons from early life. And the more and more studies that are going into, the more things are becoming clear and things make more sense. And so we really need to relook at how are we approaching that. Sometimes people's hands are tied and they have no choice. But where you have a choice, I strongly urge is that before the age of 3, do not send your children to preschool. And while in this situation, while we are homeschooling, and I know a lot of people who actually homeschool full time, they do the same process where from the below the age of 7, they do a lot of play and learning activities, not formal desk sitting down activities. So this is something you can do. I try all the Islamic ways, but my teenagers don't always seem interested. What can I do to make them more keen? So you have to understand your child. You know what your child likes. And remember, there isn't one solution for all. Whatever interests your child, you make something, tailor it around your child. So if their interest is in something, or there's a game they enjoy, try and adapt that game that enables you for you to be able to learn and educate. A lot of the time, don't necessarily make it a formal sit down. Like sometimes you have a conversation and so much learning. Like today after Fajr, we played Fajr, and the children started talking about something, and then we ended up having like about a 45-minute chat at Fajr, and they're all tired, want to go to sleep. But we had a long conversation. It was a very beneficial conversation because their minds were quite fresh. They were listening. We had a very engaging conversation. And sometimes you have to use every moment for it just to come out and to use that, the time and the circumstances to be able to really discuss and to cover different topics. Okay, are there any books that we can read on this early detachment? There is a book, and I will share it in the group. Unfortunately, it's a book that I actually recently have been reading, and I forgot the actual name of it. But I will share that. It does cover about the early years, the early 3 years, inshallah, and I can share that in the WhatsApp groups. Okay, right, inshallah. There's a sister saying, brother, what's your view on watching the Umar series? We started watching it that way as a teacher children. The seerah about this depicts the Sahabas, and I'm not comfortable with that. My teenager enjoy watching it. People are saying it's wrong. So yeah, again, the difference of opinion on that. There are, in terms of factually, from what I've heard, that it's quite accurate in terms of what is being depicted. It can be an alternative learning, but again, similarly, there are things regarding, depicting the Sahabas. Again, I can't really comment on it. Again, it is really based on kind of opinion and options. But from what I have heard, I've not watched it, but what I've heard from those who have is it's very kind of, they find it beneficial in terms of learning a lot about Islamic history, a lot about the Sahabas. So again, it's up to each parent, inshallah. Cool. Inshallah. With that, inshallah, I don't think there are any more questions coming in. So it's just a quick reminder, and please do, if you haven't, sign up to the WhatsApp groups for parenting, Islamic Parenting 101 for mothers and fathers, which is basically bit.ly/mothers101 or /fathers101, and you can join the WhatsApp groups, and they're designed for mainly asking questions and answers. Alhamdulillah, there's been a lot of fruitful discussion and question and answers. Inshallah, with that, I will end the session. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Please do join in next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.